welcome to Expansion Pak episode 71, your super secretive Patreon-only episode where John and Jeremy and we all talk about, me being Trey, we all talk about extra stuff. We kind of have more topic-based monthly episodes on here. And since we're like a couple weeks away from the official Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, and knowing probably what the release date will be of the Switch 2, I thought we could do an episode themed in that way. And I figured that we would just kind of go through and talk about our memories of like the launches of the last like 5 Nintendo systems. And you know, we weren't always there on the day for all of them, so I kind of just put together like my own memories of like when I got the system first and like what games swayed me to it, or what were like the first big ones that I got into and that sort of thing. And there's a few of them, there's a couple of them that both of us have, that we have experiences with, you know, with John and I and Jeremy and I, you know, doing different stuff. So thought it'd be fun to go through and just talk about our memories of games, of video game systems that were released. And just for the fun of it, I thought I'd throw in an honorable mention as well, and that is the Super Nintendo and Genesis, which Jeremy and I had Super Nintendos, and John had a Genesis. And I don't know if we have probably talked a little bit about our origins with those systems, but I thought we would start off talking about that.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good.
Start at the very beginning.
So, yeah.
So what generation is that again? That's generation 3?
This second generation.
As far as Nintendo, I would say what would be generation 1? Game & Watch?
First gen is like, you know, Atari, Odyssey, and
okay, that's gotta be third or fourth gen.
Yeah, but we're talking about. I thought we were just talking about Nintendo systems, so I put it.
Sure.
I put it at second gen. I mean, I never had an Atari, so that doesn't count. I did have a Commodore 64, but I never was like, I don't know. We're talking. I just said we'd just start with the Super Nintendo because, I mean, you know, whatever. We probably got NESs for Christmas or whatever. Like, we don't need to talk about that system.
Right.
I just thought it'd be fun because we had different, because you didn't get a Super Nintendo, you got a Genesis, and I don't think we ever.
I did get a Genesis.
I don't think we ever really talked about the origins of how you got your Genesis.
Sure.
And that sort of thing. I'll start off with mine. I'm sure maybe I said it before, maybe I didn't. I don't remember. I had a paper out around this time. The Super Nintendo launched in 1991, I believe, in August. Yeah, August 23rd, 1991 was the American launch date of it, and I had a paper out at the time, and I saved my paper out money for a Super Nintendo, and I was very adamant about getting one that did not come with a Mario game, because I was completely anti-Mario at the time. I hated Mario. So I went out of my way to get the Super Nintendo that came without any games. It was just the system by itself. So I bought a Super Nintendo gameless, just on its own. And I remember,
you're so cool.
I remember before even getting the Super Nintendo, there was a rental place that we had in town called Village Video, which is funny because you know, on movie sets where you have all the monitors and stuff, it's called Video Village. So that's the opposite. But yeah, the Village Video was our rental place that we went for everything. So like every game I ever rented like pretty much came from there, and that actually had a lot to do with my love of comic books, because I remember they started selling 50-cent issues there, and that's when I started getting into comic books and all that sort of thing. And I would always go in the horror section and look at all the horror movies and stuff like that, look at the front and backs of the covers and whatnot. But you were able to rent systems there, you know, so you could rent entire systems. And we rented a Super Nintendo from there. And I think the first time we had it was I rented the Super Nintendo and Final Fight 1, and that's what I played on there. So I think Final Fight 1 was the first game I ever played on Super Nintendo. And and I was kind of sold from there. I was trying to remember if there was a second game that I rented with it, but I don't remember. I remember I remember us renting the NES as well, and the game we rented with that was Goonies 2. What a terrible game to rent with that system. It's not very fun to play. But I mean, it was a funny one to get. But I rented that and I played Final Fight, and I got the Super Nintendo with no games. And I remember going to Florida to stay with my dad around Christmas time, and the present for my sister was there too. My oldest sister Kelly was there, and our present was he was going to take us to a mall and give us like a certain amount of money to spend at the mall. I think he gave us like $100 or something like that. And he's like, "Here, just have at it." So I bought Mortal Kombat 1 for Super Nintendo with my mall money. and I think that was the first Super Nintendo game I ever bought. Was the Mortal Kombat 1 that had no blood in it, but I wanted that game, and I think I still believe that it had its own blood code for Super Nintendo, even though that wasn't true. But I think probably around the playground, people said that it was in there, and I believed it. But I have both of them now. I have the Genesis one and the Super Nintendo one. I have the Game Gear one too, and then the Super Nintendo one still plays the best out of all of them, whether it has blood or not. It just works better, and it also has more buttons. So I still swear by that version. And some of the new fatalities that they made actually ended up showing up in later Mortal Kombat games. So they can thank that Super Nintendo version for it. But yeah, that's my Super Nintendo memories.
People are so focused on the blood they didn't think about the friendship.
Yeah, friendships weren't there yet. But I mean,
but
you could still do. But they were still interesting aside from like the Johnny Cage move where he puts his foot in your stomach. The other ones are pretty good. Like Raiden, instead of like shocking you until your head explodes, he just like turns you to dust, which makes sense. Like he shocks you and your bones turn into dust. And the cool
that's
one
been happening in Looney Tunes as long as I can remember.
Yeah, and the cool one, like Sub-Zero freezes you and breaks you, and that actually was a fatality in Mortal Kombat 2. So I mean, they took that and ran with it and used.
Plus,
it
it was
Mortal
like
Kombat
Demolition
2.
Man.
Yeah, and it's one that you've seen in later Mortal Kombat games too. So I mean, and the other ones were like Sonya's one where she does the Kiss of Death, like that one's the same. Scorpion's is the same, because I guess it's okay to have your skin melt off of you as long as you're not like pulling a head off or like ripping somebody's spinal cord out or whatever.
That's just aging really fast.
Yeah. And what was it? Kano's move was the same. They just took the heart out. It's the exact same move, except he just like grabs your chest and then he just holds up an empty hand. So I guess they didn't know what to do with that one. So they just took the heart out. It's like he's just pulling, I don't know what he's doing. He's like nipple twisting you or something to death. I don't know. But yeah, what was your experience with Super Nintendo, Jeremy?
Well, mine mainly was we were pretty late to the game, pun intended, but we had just gotten our Nintendo when the Super Nintendo came out, so we were like I said, we were behind. But the first thing I remember seeing was like I was at my grandma's house and they're watching the news or whatever, something boring like that, and there was a little segment about the Super Nintendo. That's the first I ever had heard about it, and all I can remember is it was just like a bunch of really big shapes because it was Mario World they were showing. But I just remember like all I could really focus on was like the big like land geometry moving and how it was like doing the parallax thing or whatever, the parallax scrolling. But to me, it just seemed like so abstract. It didn't make sense to me that this was like a better Nintendo. This was like something completely different. And for me, that took a little while to wrap my head around until I finally got to play one. And I think I tried one probably at the store by that point, maybe at a rental store or something. But we didn't actually get to sit down and play one until my parents' family friends had us over to like hang out with their kids, and who had just gotten a Super Nintendo. And we spent the night and played like the entire night, or that's how I remember it. And that was awesome because they had it hooked up to the stereo, so the sound was awesome. Like I remember the stereo sound blew me away in the cave level. Once you get to Vanilla Dome and you're in the cave and it's like really echoey. And then I remember getting scared at the ghost houses. The Big Boo is terrifying. We hadn't seen something like that before.
It's very large.
Mm-hmm.
Very large Boo.
But by the time we got one, it wasn't a whole lot later. It could have been more than a year later when we finally got one. And my dad bought it for us at the pawn shop, so it wasn't like full price, and was able to get us a bunch of games too. So we started out right off the gate with having like a Game Genie, and then we had Mario, and then we had Mario Kart, and we just had all these games. It was great. Actually, you know what? We didn't have Mario Kart because that wasn't out yet. I remember that came out and we rented it. Maybe? No, that was Star Fox. See, I'm getting it all confused. The thing about the Super Nintendo is the last time I remember it being like a system where the whole family played it. And this was like when my parents would have people over, we'd go to their houses. Like everybody was playing the Super Nintendo. It wasn't just the kids. So we'd play like Family Feud and whatever. We used to play like Anticipation on the NES. I've heard you talk about that board tray.
Oh, but Anticipation, yeah.
Yeah, whatever like whatever like kind of games you could rent they would rent games to play at like family game nights and stuff. But
So, do you think you got yours in 92 or 93? Like, how much later do you think?
it had to have been 93.
Because I was just
Maybe it was like late 92.
because I don't think I got mine until 93 because I was looking at the release of Mortal Kombat, and Mortal Kombat on Super Nintendo didn't come out till like September of 93. And that was like the first game that I got. And I remember being anti Super Nintendo also, along with my anti Mario ness, because I was mad that Nintendo was forcing me to buy a new system. I was convinced that the NES would be the system that we played forever until we're dead. So, you
I
know,
think it's so funny. I think it's like you see the reports on YouTube now of like parents being mad that the Super Nintendo came out and why did they come out with another one?
Oh no, I remember.
All
Yeah,
that.
that's how I
Well,
felt.
you were that parent, but you were like
Yeah.
13 years old. You know,
well, Trey's like, I don't even want a game. I just want it. I just want the system.
Yeah, I was like, oh, they're betraying me because they're betraying their NES fans because they're making you buy this different thing.
Yeah.
So I was like, fuck that. And I remember I convinced my friend Daniel. I was like, fuck that. You got to get a Genesis, man. The Genesis is cooler because I don't know why. I was just like, you got to get one. And I think I said that
Because it has an
that-
adapter where you can play Master System games.
Yeah, where he was like, I don't think he ever forgave me.
Which
for
I think
that,
it does.
That I convinced him to get a Genesis. But I mean, but I was like, no, the Genesis is cooler because they didn't betray the NES havers. And I remember my cousin like convinced.
Well,
convinced
they're
me
doing the
that-
opposite.
Yeah,
They're trying to get you to betray the NES.
sure. My cousin convinced me to get a Super Nintendo because he told me, he's like, listen, those are the only games. Games are only going to come out on the Super Nintendo now. You got to give up on the NES. So, so I did. Because he showed me Nintendo Power. Because I had Nintendo Power, and he's like, look, here's Nintendo Power. It's got a Super Nintendo game on the front. It's going to be on the front of every issue after this. Nobody cares about the NES anymore. And I was like, all right, you're right. You're right, man. I should get one of
Finally,
those.
someone speaking reason
Yeah.
to young Trey.
But I kind of rebelled against it for a few years because I was like, "F that, man! I just want my NES where I can just play Batman or whatever else dumb game that I played, like Batman and Terminator 2 and Anticipation, which I did play a lot of Anticipation back then. That was the first game I ever beat or that I ever saw credits on was Anticipation single player.
once again, more like an adult than a 13-year-old. You're playing the Anticipation.
Well,
It's your favorite game.
I mean, the fun thing about Anticipation is there aren't that many questions, so you can easily memorize it and just play
It
through
was
the whole
that
thing.
and the tax software. Those were Trey's two favorite games.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like playing Anticipation by myself because I wouldn't lose. And like I said, there weren't that many questions, so you play it enough times, you know all the pictures, and you can just guess it before it draws it. So it's like, you can just kind of just go through it and beat the game and be like, hey, yeah, I beat the game. Because I thought most games were too hard at that time. Because a lot of them were. A lot of NES games were hard.
Yeah, I still like to beat an easy game every once in a while. I get it.
Yeah.
Well, when I think about the timeline, it's a little murky, but I know we lived in this house. We moved back from California in early 1991, and we got the Nintendo sometime that year when we lived there. So it probably would have been 92 that we got it. So it probably was still relatively new because it came out here in late 91, right?
Yeah, August. August.
So I think we probably got it sometime around the holidays the following year. But I remember it's such a cool memory thinking back on it. Like I see it from different perspectives now that I'm older, but I used to think of it just like I was excited that we were getting the Super Nintendo. I found out about it. My dad called and my mom and my dad were talking to us about it, like, cause he found it at the pawn shop and he was calling to see, check with my mom. It's okay to get it. I think about that now, and I see that like my dad just being so excited, couldn't keep it a secret. Had to call and let everyone know. That's pretty cool. And I remember telling my mom like being super excited about the Game Genie because I thought the Game Genie would let you do literally anything you wanted to do.
I mean, that was the rumor.
I thought too. Yep.
So I was like, the very first thing I'm going to do with the Game Genie is I'm going to make it so I can eat, charge, and chuck.
Mhm.
That was the first thing I wanted to do was be able to eat, charge, and chuck with Yoshi, which you can't do. You can't do. I've never figured out how.
If you go back through the archives of our expansion packs, we did do an episode about the Game Genie, like years
And
ago.
I probably
so
told that story there too.
you probably did, but I'm just saying, if you want to go back into the expansion pack archives, just look up EXP on your Patreon app, and you can find all of them on there. And you go back to that one. But
yeah, I don't know. There's just so many memories with it, but that's what I remember at the beginning.
yeah. A couple of years ago, 1989, back in the year of 1989, there was a little system called the Sega Genesis, which also launched in August of 1989. What brought you to having your Genesis, John?
Well, I didn't get my Genesis until, again, 1993. We all stepped into the 16-bit generation in 1993 for some reason.
Did you not want to let go of your NES either?
Well, I can remember
We weren't that late into the 16-bit generation, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. Well, so in 93, I turned 11 that year. From the time that the Genesis came out until then, I was like, what, 8? I was 8, maybe 7 or 8 until 11. When you're that young, it's like not like you have that much buying power. Like, you got your NES, be happy with it. You can beg and plead all you want, whatever, but you're not going to get that new system because you got the NES at home. Well, when I was 11, by the time I was 11, my parents had set up like a summer chore system for us, where like every summer we had our chores that we were supposed to do. And I remember that summer in 93, they threw in kind of a little bonus where it was like, here's your chores you have to do, but if you want to do these extra other chores, you can earn some allowance money.
Mm.
And so we started to do that.
Oh,
and I think
the allowance was an addition. Oh, okay.
it was an addition. Yeah. So you had your basic chores you had to do, but then there was a list of extra chores that you could do for a little bit of allowance money. And I think it was that I got the bright idea, like, hey, if we all pool our extra allowance money, then we can get a new game system, because this thing is looking a little long in the tooth, at this point. And I think I was pretty much also the one who was the most persuasive in which of the two to get, and I was using some kind of logic in deciding.
Was it the blast
Genesis
processing that sold you on it? You're like, oh, but it's so
No.
fast.
No, it was that most of my friends had Super Nintendo, and so if I got the Genesis, then I could play both games.
Oh, sure.
That was it.
You're being smarter about it. You're thinking about the idea of having two systems. Because I guess my friend Daniel that I convinced to get a Genesis, I could play his games and he could play my games.
Right.
But when Final Fantasy came around, I think he was secretly mad at me for convincing him to get a Genesis, because when like Final Fantasy and Donkey Kong Country and all that came around, he was kind of like, he felt left out.
Wipe your eyes off and play Phantasy Star.
Yeah, well, we didn't know about Phantasy Star. Like, I didn't know it existed at the time. If I did, I would have been like, hey, Phantasy Star, and I would have loved it. But yeah, I didn't play Phantasy Star until it was on Virtual Console on Wii. So I didn't know that much about the Genesis games aside from, the ones that we saw at the rental place. Like we were playing we were playing stupid games. We were playing Wolverine's Adamantium Rage and like Caveman games and like other shit like that on there. And Echo the Dolphin, which I still think is an awful game, but I tried very hard to like that game. It's not good though.
Nope.
I can remember finally getting, that last dollar and going to Toys R Us, and I can remember feeling like down to the minute. Like,
did they tell you that you had to have you had to pay for tax too?
I don't recall. I think they figured it out, and we had to pay for everything. I'm pretty sure we had to pay for everything.
Okay.
So I remember I think the price was like $90 or something. It was the Model 2 Genesis. I can remember for some reason the $90 is ringing in my head. Like, I think that's what it cost, and it came with Sonic 2. But I can remember up to the moment when I was at Toys R Us, like, I wasn't so sure about my choice anymore. Like, I kind of hyped my sisters up on the Genesis, and like, we're in the car on the way. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know. I'm thinking to myself, should we get the Super Nintendo? Should we get the Super Nintendo? But I kind of like already made the bed and had to lay in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can't change.
I imagine that
in
the Super
store.
Nintendo would have cost more at the time,
I
possibly.
think it did. Yeah, I think that was the other thing too. Yeah, so we came home with the Genesis that day, and I enjoyed it. But after a time, I just remember like,
what did you guys get? What did you get with it? What was
Sonic 2.
Sonic 2.
Oh, Sonic 2. Okay.
Yeah, it was the packing game.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yep. That's the only game I think that was the only game that we got. But I remember very shortly afterward just like having buyer's remorse or grass is greener syndrome, and like, oh, I should have got this Super Nintendo, to the point where like sometimes I can remember saying a prayer at night that my Genesis would turn into a Super Nintendo, and then like anxiously looking downstairs in the morning, like,
is that like
No,
a form of transubstantiation there? So
Yeah.
transfer from
I
one
don't
to
know.
another.
That's intercessory prayer.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So well, anyway, the Genesis is a great system, and I got a small but good library of Genesis games out of it, and some good memories too.
On the I was just looking on the Mortal Kombat Wikipedia stuff, and from what Jeremy was saying about the Super Nintendo Game Genie, the Super Nintendo Game Genie, there is a code actually where you can turn the sweat you can make the sweat red, so it looks like
that's
blood.
cool.
Because in the Super
So
Nintendo
there is a
one,
blood code.
yeah, so there's a blood code of sorts. You have to use the Game Genie though, but you don't get the different. Obviously, you don't get the different fatalities, but you can bring the blood back into it in a way.
You can't put the heart in the hand.
No. I mean, there'll be like blood that comes out of the skin or whatever, but yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, Genesis, yeah. I mean, it was, I don't know, it wasn't necessarily a bad idea, I guess, to swave to that. I mean, I think they both have their, I think they both have their positive points between the Genesis and the Genesis has always been like my, my holy grail or whatever. I own one now. I own a Sega Genesis now. Like we bought it. Jeremy was there. I bought one at one of the Midwest Gaming Classics because I always wanted to have one. I actually have two because Edwin Janet's brother sent me his, so I actually have two now. But I bought the first. Yeah, I bought it just because I always wanted one. And whenever Genesis games ended up showing up on like GameCube and Wii, I bought a lot of them. Like I wanted like the Sonic collection and. Like I said, got to play like Phantasy Star and Streets of Rage. Like I remember playing Streets of Rage 2 on a friend of mine's Genesis and just loving the music. Like that was a big thing for me, And it was just fun.
Yeah.
It was just fun to play and like skate. I remember, playing with skate on there. So it was obviously number 2.
I remember that controller felt like a piece of alien technology compared to the Super Nintendo because of the weird shape of the pad.
How huge it was, I think it was pretty clearly designed for older gamers. Like it fits my hand really well to this day. As an adult, as someone with larger hands, it's like
you like the curves.
I like the curves. Yep.
Cool.
I don't know. I felt like it was made for some older people, and that worked for them, I guess.
For sure.
And some other I want to mention too, if by chance there's any younger people listening to this, some of you might be saying, "Why didn't you just get both?" Like to all of us, why didn't you just get both?
We weren't thinking like that.
That wasn't a thing
at
the time. Like
No.
That was like the rare rich kid or somebody that you heard. Oh, he has both. You can get both. Like you didn't know that you could get both.
That was my so my cousins were getting a new stepdad, and I remember that was like the first Christmas after they married their mom. He married their mom, and they were like, he said he's going to get us a Super Nintendo and a Genesis for Christmas, and he did. He like spoiled the shit out of them.
No, I was just trying to buy their love with
pretty much.
two systems.
Pretty much,
Yeah,
but they got the two systems.
Yeah, two systems were pretty unheard of to me. Like I think,
Which I eventually bought off of the youngest brother when I went to college because they didn't care about him anymore, and I bought both for $20.
Didn't I get? I think I got a Genesis from you, Jeremy, but it didn't work. Didn't you give me one at some point? But I could never get it to work.
Broken.
That was the first one I had, but yeah, it never worked.
I have two as well. I also got one for free from a friend.
Yeah,
nice.
But I have two working ones now. But yeah, I was gonna say we can move on from there if you guys have said enough on that. Let's move on to the next system.
Hey, you!
It's me, Mario.
Yeah, you. Subscribe to our Patreon to hear our bonus shows, which happen every month.
I'm tired.
Tired of all the big corporate podcasts spoon-feeding you the same old video game news on every single show?
Spaghetti. Ravioli.
Then expand!
With NintenDomain Expansion Pak.
It's us talking about old games that were important to us. It's us interviewing people that we meet at conventions. And heck, it's live shows from those same conventions. It's basically everything you could want that NintenDomain ever made.
Here we go! And it's just $1 a month.
That's less than a bad indie on the eShop.
It's $12 a year, which is less than Nintendo Switch Online.
Thank you so much for subscribing to our Patreon and supporting NintenDomain.
Just go to patreon.com/NintenDomain podcast and, hey, Mario, let go! Whoa! He's throwing us back to the show!
So long, Bowser.
Patreon.com/NintenDomain Podcast.
Game over.